Today I'm with a gentleman from the Netherlands, and I've been looking forward to talking to. Jos van Boxtel's with me today. He's an author, a renowned hypnotherapist, and a trainer of health professionals. His latest book is Stephen Brooks and the Art of Compassionate Hypnotherapy, Volume 1, which deals primarily with phobias. Jos, thank you for being with me today.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. So let's start with what is compassionate hypnotherapy?
Compassionate hypnotherapy means that, actually it means two things. Is that the therapist is communicating from a state of compassion with the client, and at the same time he's modeling and demonstrating and initiating compassion in the client for himself. So there's these two things that combined, which are very powerful, and that is something that Stephen Brooks is part of his way of working with people. Is a very important part of it, that state of compassion and that idea and that philosophy of compassion, which is, I believe, is very healing for people.
Yeah. And it's a necessary ingredient of so many approaches to helping people heal, but it's not something that we generally talk a lot about, I think, in our field.
No, it isn't. And I think it's an important part of it. And Stephen Brooks originally is an Ericksonian hypnotherapist, and obviously compassion was a huge part of Erickson's way of working, and he got that from him, and he increased that very much by combining and integrating Ericksonian hypnotherapy with non-attachment therapy, which has everything to do with the state of compassion. So that is something I modeled from Stephen Brooks to work from that state of mind. And it has become a very large part of my communication with clients and people in general, I guess.
Well, you brought up non-attachment therapy. This idea of non-attachment is hard for anybody, I think, to practice, particularly in our kind of Western culture. But as a therapist, how has learning non-attachment helped you?
Well, it helped me in a way that I became more non-attached, more free from having to be successful or having to create a change in the client, because that can put a lot of pressure on the client, which I certainly did in the beginning of my career. And it kind of freed me from that, and a lot of things in my personal life, actually, being free or non-attached from success or money or things or objects. And of course, that is you're right about that. That is quite challenging for us in the Western world, maybe for people in general, but especially for us. To be non-attached from anything that could or would define my identity. And at the same time, that's equally important for many of my clients.
Well, and this, I guess, as therapists, we have to learn to be non-attached to outcomes. And so much of our field is based on outcomes. And so we kind of have this walk in this tightrope between you have a goal that you and the client want, but yet you don't want to be attached. How do you kind of navigate that?
I learned to do that by living, accepting actually this paradox. It's a paradox because I was trained in NLP. I'm an NLP trainer as well. And Stephen Brooks is an NLP trainer. And NLP is very goal-oriented. So the client has a goal, and it's important to know that goal, and it's important to pursue that goal. And at the same time, if that is my goal and my a role as a therapist depends on that, it's not going to work very well. I need to free myself from that goal while pursuing that, all while accepting that from the client. So it's a tightrope. It is.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I learned to live with that is to just to embrace that paradox and accept that.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped me a lot.
Did you feel that kind of a lot of people were like feel like they're giving up their sense of control and power in
Yes.
therapy sessions?
Yes, and I guess that's exactly where non-attachment and Ericksonian hypnotherapy interact, because a huge part of, as I understand it, Ericksonian hypnotherapy is about letting go of conscious control and handing it over to the unconscious. That was a huge part of what Erickson developed, and what Stephen Brooks, as one of the first generation Ericksonians, has picked up and further developed, and I learned as part of my training. So giving up control, conscious control, and handing it over to something which is very new or undefined for many people, which in Ericksonian hypnotherapy is the unconscious, but which can be something else, whatever the client believes. So, yeah.
That's I guess we naturally as humans, we want to grasp for control and power because that gives us a sense of certainty. And it sounds to me like in compassionate hypnotherapy, the therapist is modeling also by not being too attached to an outcome or control that state. And it's kind of like a loop between the two, the therapist and the client.
Yeah. It's a loop between the therapist and the client. The therapist is modeling this state of non-attachment. He's also modeling the state of unconscious processing, unconscious functioning. So in a way, a large part of my working life, I'm in a trance, which I'm fine about. A very nice way of working. So I'm modeling it, and at the same time, stimulating it, facilitating it, whatever you call it, in the client, so that they can have a first or further experience of that. And that's very exciting. I notice on a daily basis for clients to get to that state and to experience letting go of control and finding something else and something new and something helpful. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, since you have I don't want to say mastered, but have reached a more mastery level of compassionate hypnotherapy,
yes.
Can you compare and contrast with the other hypnosis styles that you've learned in the past?
Yeah, I can do that. I often in my trainings I compare it with two other styles of hypnotherapy. One being the classical hypnosis, where you work with more direct suggestions and predefined scripts and ritualized induction techniques, where it's much more about what I would do as a therapist, what I would say, what suggestions I would give. That would be the healing or the changing element of the therapy. So that's a huge difference between classical hypnosis and Ericksonian hypnosis. The latter being somehow triggering, initiating an unconscious process, which all happens in the client, and where I not necessarily am a part of it. I stay out of that. Mm-hmm. And another style of hypnotherapy is many hypnotherapists in the Netherlands, I don't know about other countries, but are trained to work in an integrative or eclectic style, which means that they contact the unconscious of the client via the conscious mind, which oftentimes works fine. I've been trained myself at first in that direction. the problem I encountered oftentimes is that the conscious mind is still there and still active and still sometimes in the way, keeps control. So the more the conscious mind can let go, it can be confused or overloaded or entertained or whatever it takes, the more the unconscious mind can do what it needs to do and what it knows to do. So those are very different styles of what is called hypnotherapy. And I kind of developed in the direction of compassionate Ericksonian hypnotherapy over the years, studying and modeling many examples, and Stephen Brooks is one of them.
Well, let's talk just a brief moment about your latest book is about, as I mentioned, is about compassionate hypnotherapy, specifically dealing with phobias.
Yes, right.
So can you give a kind of an overview of how this approach tends to work with phobias and kind of what you've learned in your own work and, working with other people about how that relates?
Yeah, well, I wrote this book on the basis of a video recorded demo of Stephen Brooks. Actually, a demo from the 90s. It's quite a while ago, but it's still very up to date in a sense that it's a brilliant technique for treating phobias very quickly. It is, in a way, it is based on the NLP fast phobia technique. The difference with the standard technique is that that's the way I was struck by the video and decided to write a book on it. Is that it's a wonderful combination of an NLP technique on the one hand, which is excellent, and using a very compassionate style of communication with the client, utilizing all of her thinking styles and language patterns and behavior, and utilizing the context. So it's a wonderful example of how utilization works. And the other part is performing this kind of standard NLP technique in the form of indirect suggestion. And Stephen Brooks is absolutely brilliant in using embedded suggestions and implications and linking. The book is a very rich source for learning indirect language. That's how I used it at the beginning. And that's the reason I decided this must be published. So I want to write a book about this. So analyzing just this one demo was so much material. And I realized I could cover a large part of Ericksonian hypnotherapy and compassionate hypnotherapy, just analyzing and describing this demonstration.
Yeah. Well, what do you find that when you're working with phobias tends to be the greatest challenge?
Yes. What was your question, sorry?
No worries. I said, when you're working with phobias, what tends to be the greatest challenge for you?
I would say that the greatest challenge in the end oftentimes is for the client believing that it can be resolved quickly, especially people who have had a phobia for a long time, sometimes for decades. The technique itself is fairly simple. And I've learned if I can combine that with indirect suggestions and utilize the unconscious resources people bring with them, resolving the problem is not that big a deal oftentimes. The step that is sometimes very challenging is for people to really believe and realize the problem is over, and what changes will come from that in my life. And am I up to that? And especially if, as I said, if you deal with phobias who have been existing for many years, sometimes people's lives are arranged around the phobia.
Mhm.
So letting go of that and having the courage for people to lead a different life once their phobia is gone. That's oftentimes quite challenging and also a very interesting part of the therapy. So I'm quite aware of that. That overcoming the phobia is one thing, but supporting a person in integrating that in their life is another part.
Mhm. I think you bring up an excellent point, is that when, and I've seen it, that just like you've said, that there's a hesitancy to change, not because they're just being a resistant client, is that
Yeah,
so much
yeah,
of their life has been built around this. And I think sometimes when people go to these kind of, what I call quick fix seminars, and
yeah,
they get up on stage and they do these, dog and pony show kind of, ooh,
yes,
look at, carnival-esque
yes,
things. Sometimes it works, a lot of times it doesn't, or it works short term. And then when
yes,
they go back to their life, it comes back. And I think it's because the person doing those a lot of times either doesn't have time, or unfortunately isn't aware or doesn't care about the social context that these things take place. So if I have always unconsciously used a phobia to design my life, and then you take away the very thing that designs my life, now you're taking away a part of me. And
yes, yes,
we naturally go, oh, I don't want to cease to exist. So
yes,
there's that identity component, isn't there?
yes. There's the identity component, and there's this system component. People's social life or their working life
Hmm.
sometimes has been built around a phobia or any problem, in fact. And I think you're right in that oftentimes happen. If people go for a quick fix, it's not that the quick fix didn't work or that it wasn't a good approach. But the fact that people sometimes go back to the problem because they can't deal with the solution, or at least not without some support or some clues or tools to handle that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, as as you were saying that, I was thinking, for years I suffered with back pain,
Yes.
and every way I moved was a way to not have sharp pain that would immobilize me. Fortunately, I was able to find some practitioners that were able to basically take away the back pain,
Yes.
and I went back to my life. And I noticed for a good while, I was still behaving as
Yes.
if I had the back pain, avoiding certain things, certain movements, and I wasn't
Yes.
even thinking about it. So just even that learning and conditioning is in there
Yes.
that reinforces it. And it's taken me a while to kind of overcome that.
Right. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the same thing happens with many people. People who have, by the time they get to me or to you or any therapist, by the time they get to us, they probably had the problem for quite a while,
Right.
and they have adjusted their lives to the problem. And it's an important part of it to take care of that and to be aware of that as a therapist.
Mhm. Now, with this idea of compassionate hypnosis,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that sometimes you don't, in the preliminary stages, kindly confront people on things, does
No, no,
uh,
no.
I remember,
Compassion doesn't necessarily mean nice.
right. So
Two
sometimes
different
it's
things.
the compassion to confront, as they used to
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
but it's coming from a certain place as opposed to someone trying to have power over the other one. It's
Right,
just
right.
trying to open up um,
Yes,
these flexibility in the person by maybe
yes,
nudging them a little bit.
yes. I think that's an important point, and Erickson has been a wonderful teacher in that respect. One thing I regret in my life is that I never met him. He died in 1979, I think, and I was a young student at the time. I didn't know him,
Yeah.
but he has been a wonderful teacher in teaching us that, and many of his followers, and Stephen Brooks is definitely one of them. So yeah.
Mhm. Well, let me ask you, you're a trainer of health professionals in these kind of methods. So
Yes.
as a teacher and a trainer, what specifically do you want to most get across to your students who are learning these methods and ideas?
The one thing I think I continuously try to bring across is that shift from conscious thinking and talking and reasoning to unconscious functioning, unconscious search, unconscious process. And many of my students have been trained to work with or via the conscious mind. Psychologists who have studied CBT, they have learned to work with the conscious mind for people to become aware of their irrational thoughts and then at the conscious level make a change. And even hypnotherapists oftentimes have been trained to work with or via the conscious mind. So one of the main things I try to bring across is for people to first within themselves and then within their clients to allow that shift to happen. And so that's about principle. And the other part that goes along with that is indirect suggestion. So that's one of the big things I learned from Erickson and all of his followers is to wrap up messages and to create implications and to create psychological implication. And that is my challenge and the joy in my life as well, to teach that to people and to be in that state myself, to demonstrate that, to teach that. So that's a big part of my working life as well, apart from working with clients and doing it myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've also heard that you didn't originally start being a hypnotherapist, that you went a much different route and then found your way back to this. Could you just briefly tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, this is quite a journey. I studied something entirely different. I studied physics when I was young, and I worked in that field for about 10 years. And along the way, I realized that I didn't want to work with science or computers or molecules, and I want to work with people. And so I started a search which has gone on until today, actually. So I did a training in body work at first in the United States. And there I heard about Erickson for the first time, and I was intrigued by that. So after that training, I did a training in hypnotherapy, not necessarily Ericksonian hypnotherapy, but integrative hypnotherapy. Learned NLP, became an NLP trainer, started a practice, and then in the course of time, I gradually learned about Erickson's work more and more. And about 10 years ago, I found Stephen Brooks. I didn't know him before that. One of the reasons is he didn't write books. I knew all the other guys, but he didn't write books. And I saw this one video that was available of his, and immediately looked him up and signed up for his trainings. And things went very quickly. I started to work with him. Did some trainings for him in the last couple of years, and then we decided I decided I wanted to write a book, so I did that together with him, and we started this series. And I learned a lot from that. So I developed. I came a long way from being a technically, scientifically oriented scientist to being an intuitive and people-oriented hypnotherapist.
So balancing that right brain and the left brain.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the feelings I have, that I made a huge shift in the course of the years from being entirely left-brained to rather right-brained. I can still appreciate my left brain functioning. It's still there. Thank God it's still there.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
So I can be kind of analytical, but I can be intuitive and associative, and that's a very different state of being. And I'm kind of glad I made that shift in my life, because I know what is possible in terms of change.
Right.
This has been a huge change for me. So I know from experience how much change is possible in one person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of glad I can model that for my clients and students.
Right. Right. Well, I find that sometimes when we are allowing ourselves to kind of push up against our limits,
Yes.
even in the session, in the interaction, that I do believe unconsciously it affects the client in a positive way, you know, and even the way that when we make a mistake and we just say, "Oh, I apologize, I screwed up," we're modeling not only good manners, but
Yes.
saying, you know, showing our humanity, and that, you know, those kind of things. And I think that, and I've said this multiple times, is that our quest for our techniques and training sometimes gets in the way of forgetting that it's that interaction between the two,
Yes.
and that modeling that makes a difference. I think you would probably agree with that.
Yes, absolutely. I believe that very strongly, that it's in the end it's the interaction, and both your role as a facilitator, or sometimes advisor, or sometimes coach, or whatever role you're in, and at the same time modeling parts of life, and making mistakes is part of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of the things I thoroughly learned in that respect is that the state of not knowing is a great state of being in as a therapist. And there's the paradox again. I know what to do with a client. I know how to treat a phobia, or an obsession, or a depression, but at each moment, being with the clients, I'm in a state of not knowing what I'm going to do, or not knowing what I'm going to say next. So sometimes even in the middle of a sentence, I think, well, what will be the rest of this sentence?
Mm-hmm.
Or this question, I'm not sure.
Right.
Again, I'm opening up to my own unconscious mind to allow something to come up. And I'm also demonstrating, having that interaction, it's okay to not know.
Right. Yeah.
That's a very powerful state of mind, I guess.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, how can people find out about your work, your trainings? What's the best place for people to find you?
The best place is my website. My company name is MindSpring. So mind and the spring. MindSpring, or mindspringtraining.nl. That's important, because I'm in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
So there they can find out about my therapies and my trainings, the training courses I give to people. And they can find out more about the book that I wrote about Stephen.
Great. Well, yes, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I think you're doing some great work over there, and I just hope you continue, because I think you're helping a lot of people.
Yes, I will. I certainly will. Thank you very much.
All right, thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure.